The bedroom door creaked open. From the hallway, an old man in a long nightgown stumbled in. His skin was gray and sickly, and his white hair hung in a crumpled mess beside his head. He trembled with every movement, slowly walking through the threshold and gently closing the door behind him. Though it was dark in the room, he didn't bother to light any candles. He knew his stay wouldn't be long. Hobbling towards the bed along the right side of the room, with each weary step shooting pain up his shaking legs, he rested his hand on the sheets and reached towards the nightstand. He picked up a small picture frame and held it up in the moonlight. In it was a photo of a woman, smiling at him in the middle of a field. On the bottom of the frame was a small gold plate with an inscription etched into the surface. It read, "Whatever it is, we'll do it together." He stared at the picture, never allowing his eyes to look at anything but her face. He sighed and set the frame back on the nightstand, then grasped the bedsheets and pulled them aside. He lay down in his bed, recognizing that his illness was getting the better of him. His muscles ached with every movement as he struggled to pull his sheets to his chest. He propped up his head with his pillow and took one last look at his room, which was uncared for in his recent condition. With short, wispy breaths, he folded his hands together, closed his eyes, and waited for the inevitable. As he drifted off, he felt a cold presence in the room with him. He opened his eyes and looked out. There, standing at the foot of his bed, was the shadow. "Why are you here?" the man asked. "Have you come to take my life before nature can take it from me? Have you come to claim my blood as your own after haunting me for so long?" Its silhouette looked barely human in the dim ambience of the room. Its shape flickered constantly in the moonlight, as though it could never keep a consistent form. It was partially translucent, as you could see the dresser on the far wall through it. No light shone from its bright white eyes, though he could feel it staring into his very soul. "If it's my spirit you want, it will soon be yours. I don't think there will be much I can do to stop you from taking it once it leaves this crumbling tomb of a body. Or maybe you'll make use of these dying bones. Maybe you'll play with them like a puppet. Perhaps you'll use them as a vessel of your own. You can certainly get more use out of them than I could." The man paused. "Or maybe it's neither. Obviously, though, you want something from me. Why else would you have followed me for so long?" The shadow didn't move. It kept its stare, silently looming over him. The wind picked up outside. The curtains jostled with the breeze. "Unless you want something of me. Is there something you want me to do before I go? Something I hadn't done in my life that you wish I had?" "I fear it's too late for any of that now. My body in its current state won't permit me to leave this bed."
Suddenly, an image appeared in his head. It was her face, smiling at him from across the dining room table. Her chin was cupped in her hand. That beautiful smile.
As quickly as the vision came, it disappeared as the room came back into view. The shadow was still there, flickering in the moonlight. He frowned. "She's dead. There's nothing I can do to change that. Not now."
Another vision appeared. Her long, dark hair was drifting in the wind, flowing majestically to the side as if being gently carried along like the waves in the glistening ocean.
The curtains fell still as the wind in the room settled. The shadow seemed almost darker than before. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. "I can't change the past. No matter how much I want to go back and do things differently, nothing can change the outcome. She's gone."
Another vision. She was sitting in the armchair across from him, crocheting something with blue and green threads. Her hands moved delicately, trying her best not to create another mess of balled-up yarn, like the previous attempts that sat on the coffee table beside her.
The man's arms went cold. His fingers became numb, and he couldn't turn his wrists or move his elbows. "Ever since she died, you've been following me around. I see you out of the corner of my eye, hiding in the shadows when I'm at my lowest. Do you feed off of my grief? Do you enjoy watching me mourn every day, waiting for the moment to finally finish off your prey like I'm some kind of sick animal?"
She was staring at him, her gray eyes shining softly in the daylight. He could see her entire being inside those eyes, everything she was, and everything he knew her to be, relishing in the thought of their love.
The shadow had moved to the left side of the bed. It was now entirely opaque, and he couldn't see anything past it. It stared at him more intensely than before, its form still writhing in the moonlight. He locked eyes with the shadow. He didn't dare to look away. She was sick. We both knew that she wouldn't wake up after that night. I couldn't bear to sleep in there with her. I couldn't stand to lie there and watch as her life slowly slipped away. I wasn't strong enough to be there for her. I couldn't be.
Her shoulders bobbed up and down as she snored quietly in the candlelight. She coughed lightly in her sleep. Her chest rose as she breathed in, and fell as she exhaled. Her whole body was shivering. His arm was wrapped around her, providing her warmth as the blizzard roared outside.
The wind picked up again. He felt his chest tighten, and his breathing became strained as his emotions welled up inside him. Using what strength he had left, he pushed himself up and sat upright, turning his head to face the shadow. "Stop! Don't show me again. I know I should have stayed with her. I regret ever leaving that room. Don't make me see it again, please!"
She was in the bed, coughing lightly as she lay there alone. "I don't want you to see me like this," she muttered, her voice barely reaching his ears.
He stared at her, his mind blank while his lover lay dying across the room.
"I love you," she shivered. Her eyes stared up at the ceiling. There was a long pause.
"I love you too," he responded quietly. His knuckles became white as his grip tightened on the doorknob. He began to close the door before something compelled him to stop.
"Don't go," she whispered. "Please."
A tear rolled down his face.
She sobbed quietly from the bed.
Unable to look back, he shut the door behind him before he slid to the floor and cried.
He covered his eyes. Her face was the only thing he could see.
He was now shouting at the shadow. "Why are you showing me these things? To remind me of the terrible truth? This everlasting burden of sorrow I carry on my shoulders? Am I not reminded enough every time I wake up to no one beside me, every time I travel without a passenger, harvest with no one to share the rewards, eat with no one across the table, sleep with no one's breath to hear? I've tried to forget her, to forget what she meant to me. So why do you show me her face? What do you gain by forcing these violent emotions upon me? Why am I being forced to relive the most agonizing moment of my life, where the only thing I had was taken from me while I sat in the other room? Why are you doing this to me? Why now?" A thick silence filled the room, broken only by the wind. For a short moment, the shadow continued to stare at him as he breathed heavily. Its form became solid, maintaining a single shape of a person. Then, to his surprise, the shadow sat down on the bed beside him. It reached out its arm and put its hand on his face. It was warm and soft. It was comforting. It almost felt affectionate. "Are you?" He trailed off. Before he could finish his thought, his eyes began to truly focus on the shadow for the first time.
Her shoulders rose and fell as she breathed softly in the silence. Her once bright white eyes dimmed to a light gray as she looked into his. Her delicate hand stayed on his cheek, never applying too much pressure. Her dark hair flowed in the wind, glistening in the moonlight like stars. On her face was a beautiful smile.
You've been with me all this time. Every time I thought of you, that was you, right there beside me."
She nodded, keeping her eyes on his.
"I'm so sorry. I never should have left you alone. I should have stayed,
With her other hand, she reached over and put her finger to his lips. Then, taking her hands off his face, she wrapped her arms around him. She held him tight as he rested his head on her shoulder.
"I don't deserve this," he whispered. Not after what I've done.
She let go and softly lowered him back onto the bed. It's time for you to rest, she said quietly. She tilted her head as her form started to fade. I love you.
I love you too, he replied.
As he closed his eyes, he turned his head to the side and looked at the picture frame on the nightstand. He smiled back at her face as he read the inscription one last time. Whatever it is,
we'll do it together.